The 1960s were a daring era of toys that thrilled kids and terrified today's safety inspectors. Let's revisit the dangerous, unforgettable playthings that defined childhoods of the decade. Let's start with one of the most popular and infamous toys of the 1960s, lawn darts. These outdoor games were the perfect addition to any summer BBQ, combining the excitement of darts with the open-air fun of a backyard. The darts themselves were no joke. They were oversized, weighted, and tipped with sharp metal points designed to stick firmly into the ground. When aimed properly, they provided hours of entertainment. But here's the catch. Misfires were far too common. A poorly thrown dart could transform into a flying missile, posing a serious danger to anyone standing in its path. It wasn't uncommon for the game to end with a few scrapes, bruises, or worse, an emergency trip to the doctor. Still, for kids in the 60s, the risk was part of the appeal. No backyard get-together felt complete without a round of lawn darts, and begging the adults for a turn was almost a rite of passage. It was thrilling, dangerous, and unforgettable. The Easy Bake Oven was a dream come true for budding chefs in the 1960s. This miniature oven used the heat of a real incandescent light bulb to bake tiny cakes, cookies, and other treats. The thrill of mixing batter, pouring it into the tiny pans, and waiting for your dessert to bake was unmatched. Kids would eagerly peek through the tiny window, hoping their cake wouldn't burn. But for all its charm, the Easy Bake Oven wasn't without risks. Its metal components could get scalding hot, and many kids learned the hard way when they accidentally touched the sides or reached in too quickly. Despite the occasional burns, the joy of creating your own treats kept kids coming back for more. Still, for all its hazards, the Easy Bake Oven gave kids a sense of independence and a sweet reward at the end. But speaking of toys that came with risks, few were as thrilling or painful as Clackers. Clackers were the ultimate mix of skill, sound, and suspense. These toys consisted of two solid plastic balls attached to either end of a string, with a loop in the center to hold on to. The challenge? Swinging them up and down in just the right rhythm so they'd collide with a satisfying clack. The louder and faster the clacks, the more impressive your skills looked to onlookers. But Clackers weren't just noisy, they were dangerous. If the string slipped out of your hand, the hard balls turned into high-speed projectiles. And when they broke, which wasn't uncommon, sharp shards of plastic could go flying. Bruised knuckles and even the occasional chipped tooth weren't unheard of. For kids in the 60s, the risk of a little pain was worth the thrill, and the louder the noise, the bigger the bragging rights. Who could forget the sheer excitement of the original Creepy Crawlers kit? With this iconic toy, kids became little creators, pouring gooey plastic into metal molds shaped like bugs, spiders, and other creepy critters. The magic happened on a hot plate that heated to over 300 degrees Fahrenheit, melting the plastic into lifelike rubber creations. The process felt like science and art combined, even if it came with its fair share of risks. Burns? They were almost a rite of passage. Many kids sported pink fingers from an accidental touch of the hot plate. But when you proudly held up your squishy, colorful bugs, it felt worth it. And let's not forget where those creepy creations ended up, stuck to car seats, walls, or even unsuspecting siblings. Do you remember how real they looked, or how they'd gross out your friends? Creepy crawlers were dangerous but unforgettable. And speaking of dangerous, how about learning science with actual radioactive materials? Let's talk about the Atomic Energy Lab Kit. Believe it or not, one of the most ambitious toys of the 60s came with real radioactive materials. The Atomic Energy Lab Kit was designed to spark curiosity in young scientists, complete with a Geiger counter, uranium ore, and instructions for nuclear experiments. Holding glowing samples and listening to the Geiger counter tick made kids feel like bona fide researchers. Exciting? Absolutely. Safe? Not so much. Parents might have cringed as kids handled radioactive elements with ungloved hands, but for children, the thrill was undeniable. Imagine setting up your mini nuclear lab in the kitchen or basement, feeling like the next Einstein. Do you remember the little guidebook that came with it, encouraging you to learn about atomic energy? The Vac-u-form was a dream come true for budding inventors in the 1960s. This fascinating machine let kids melt plastic sheets to create their own miniature models. Cars, planes, jewelry, or anything their imaginations could design. The process felt empowering, as if you were running your own factory. You'd place the plastic sheet over a mold, heat it until it softened, and then vacuum it down, to take the mold's shape. But the excitement came with plenty of risks. The Vac-u-form's heating element reached dangerously high temperatures, and burns were all too common when handling the hot plastic. If that wasn't enough, the fumes from the melting material filled the air with a smell that, in hindsight, probably wasn't healthy to breathe. Despite these dangers, kids loved the Vac-u-form for the creative freedom it offered. Do you remember the smell of the melting plastic or the pride of showing off your creations? Speaking of thrills, let's slide into the ultimate summer toy, the slip and slide. When summer heat rolled in, the slip and slide became a backyard must-have. This long, slick plastic sheet transformed any lawn into an instant water park. Kids would sprint full speed, launch themselves belly first onto the slide, and race to the other end, soaking wet and grinning ear to ear. Few toys captured the joy of summer like this one, but with speed came some bumps, literally. If the slide wasn't perfectly aligned or ended on rough grass, the ride could leave you with scrapes, bruises, or worse. And hitting the ground at the wrong angle, that could leave you sore for days. Still, the thrill of slipping and sliding at full speed outweighed the risks. Do you remember the rush of water, the cheers from friends, and the inevitable muddy mess at the end? The slip and slide brought kids together for hours of fun. For kids with a love of action, the Johnnyreb cannon was the ultimate toy. This miniature cannon, modeled after Civil War artillery, was capable of firing plastic cannonballs with surprising force. Loading the cannon, aiming it just right, and hearing the satisfying boom made kids feel like commanders on the battlefield. Backyard battles came to life as kids launched volleys at imaginary forts, tin cans, or even unsuspecting siblings. However, the excitement wasn't without its risks. Those cannonballs could pack quite a punch, especially if they hit someone who wasn't prepared. Parents often had to step in to redirect the chaos when things got too rowdy. Despite the occasional sting or startled neighbor, the Johnnyreb cannon became a staple of outdoor play. Do you remember the sound it made when you pulled the string? Or how proud you felt when your cannonball hit its mark? For many, it was the perfect mix of imagination and action, bruises included. Super elastic bubble plastic wasn't your everyday bubble toy. It was a game changer. This kit allowed kids to create enormous, colorful bubbles that seemed to defy the laws of physics. Using a straw, you'd blow the plastic solution into vibrant, rubbery spheres that could stretch far beyond what soap bubbles could achieve. Watching the bubble grow bigger and bigger without popping felt like a magical feat, but the fun came with a cost. The fumes from the plastic mix had a strong chemical smell that could leave kids feeling dizzy after prolonged play. Of course, no one thought twice about the health risks back then. The joy of creating a bubble the size of your head was worth it. Do you remember holding your breath to make the biggest bubble possible, only for it to burst in your hands? Super elastic bubble plastic might have been risky, but the memories of chasing those giant bubbles linger on. The swing wing was one of the silliest and most entertaining toys of the 1960s. Essentially, a headband with a weighted attachment. The goal was to swing it around by moving your head in a circular motion. Kids would gather to see who could keep it spinning the longest, their heads bobbing wildly in every direction. It was a goofy spectacle that had everyone laughing. Of course, it wasn't all fun and games. Swinging your head like that often led to dizziness, neck aches, and the occasional tumble when balance gave out. But the silliness of it all was half the fun. Seeing a group of friends trying to master the swing wing was a memory in itself. Do you remember the feeling of triumph when you got the rhythm just right? Or the laughter that followed when someone inevitably tipped over? The swing wing might have been ridiculous, but it was a toy that brought endless smiles and head-spinning fun. The Gilbert U-238 Atomic Energy Lab might just be the most shocking toy of the 1960s. This science kit was designed to inspire curiosity about nuclear energy, complete with real uranium samples and a working Geiger counter. The idea was to let kids learn hands-on about radioactive decay and nuclear science, a bold educational choice for its time. For budding scientists, the kit felt like a gateway to cutting-edge knowledge. Who didn't feel like a genius as the Geiger counter clicked away while testing different materials? However, the safety risks were substantial, even by the standards of the day. Handling uranium ore without protective gear or adult supervision wasn't exactly ideal, though most kids were too excited to notice the potential hazards. Do you remember feeling like a real scientist as you followed the detailed experiment guide? It's a wonder this kit ever made it to toy store shelves, but it remains a fascinating piece of history. Speaking of intriguing toys, let's look at the Wham-o Air Blaster. The Wham-o Air Blaster brought a unique kind of fun to toy boxes in the 60s. This colorful plastic gun shot bursts of air with surprising power, strong enough to knock over cups or rustle papers from a distance. Kids loved creating air battles with friends, pretending they had invisible bullets at their disposal. The real magic of the air blaster was in its simplicity. You'd aim, pull the trigger, and watch the air do the rest. But when fired at close range, those concentrated bursts of air could sting. Some kids even used it to prank friends, aiming for their faces or at stacks of cards to send them flying. It was harmless fun, mostly. Do you remember the thrill of feeling like you had superpowers, armed with a toy that left no visible evidence of its attack? The Wham-o Air Blaster was pure magic for imaginative play. But for outdoor adventure seekers, the next toy added a daring edge: metal-tipped arrows. Archery sets in the 1960s weren't just toys. They felt like tools for real-life adventures. These sets often included wooden bows and arrows tipped with actual metal points, giving kids the chance to channel their inner Robin Hood. Hitting a bullseye or crafting makeshift targets in the backyard was an exhilarating experience, but the authenticity came with risks. A missed shot could send arrows flying in unpredictable directions, posing dangers to bystanders, windows, and sometimes even the archer. Parents often cautioned kids to aim carefully, though the excitement of playing out medieval battles or reenacting scenes from adventure movies was hard to resist. Do you remember the pride of perfecting your aim, or the trouble that came from the occasional stray arrow? The Sky Ranger's rocket launcher was the ultimate toy for kids dreaming of space exploration in the 1960s. This pump-powered launcher allowed young astronauts to send rockets soaring high into the sky, capturing imaginations and creating hours of fun. The simple mechanism required pumping air into the rocket until it launched with a dramatic whoosh, leaving kids mesmerized by the sight of it disappearing into the clouds. However, the excitement came with its risks. The rockets were made of heavy materials, and what went up often came down in unpredictable ways. A misjudged trajectory could mean a rocket landing on roofs, breaking windows, or, worst of all, on someone's head. Accidents during the launch process were also common, as curious kids would sometimes stand too close, only to get hit by a misfired rocket. Do you remember the thrill of a perfect launch, or the scramble to retrieve a rocket from a neighbor's yard? Sky Rangers brought adventure, but it wasn't always smooth sailing. Chemistry sets in the 1960s weren't for the faint of heart. These kits were designed to inspire young scientists, offering real chemicals for experiments that promised dramatic reactions. From creating colored flames to tiny explosions, these sets made kids feel like geniuses in the making. Many included acids, flammable compounds, and powders that could produce exciting and often dangerous results. The risks, however, were considerable. Without proper safety equipment, like goggles or gloves, burns, chemical spills, and toxic fumes were common. In some cases, kids would accidentally mix the wrong chemicals, resulting in dangerous reactions. Parents often overlooked the hazards, trusting their children to experiment responsibly. But mishaps were inevitable. Do you remember the sense of wonder as you followed the experiment guides, or the panic of a bubbling mess gone wrong? Despite the dangers, these chemistry sets sparked creativity and curiosity like few other toys of their time. Peashooter guns were deceptively simple but endlessly entertaining. These handheld toys let kids load small projectiles like plastic or metal balls and fire them at targets or each other. Perfect for impromptu battles or knocking over small objects, Peashooter guns became a staple of childhood play in the 60s. The hazards, however, weren't immediately obvious. The small projectiles posed a choking hazard for younger siblings or pets who got their hands or mouths on them. And for older kids, the fun often escalated into danger. Aiming at someone's face was a common prank that sometimes resulted in painful accidents or eye injuries. Do you remember the thrill of hitting a target? Or the scolding that came when a stray shot hit a lamp or sibling? Peashooter guns may have seemed harmless, but their risks were just part of the fun for adventurous kids. The swinging clown acrobat was a fascinating toy that combined the charm of circus tricks with the excitement of motion. It featured a small clown figurine suspended on a wire or bar, which kids could swing back and forth with a simple push. The clown's unpredictable flips and spins made it mesmerizing to watch and fun to play with, especially as kids tried to master the perfect swing. But the risks were just as unpredictable. The toy's metal components could pinch fingers if handled carelessly, and over time, the parts could wear down and develop sharp edges. Worse yet, the swinging clown often had a mind of its own, sometimes colliding with nearby faces, leading to bruises or tears. Do you remember watching the clown perform its acrobatics, hoping to avoid an accidental hit? The fun of the swinging clown acrobat was undeniable, even if it occasionally ended in a trip to the first aid kit. Speaking of risky crafts, let's talk about glass-blowing kits. For creative kids in the 1960s, glass-blowing kits offered a unique opportunity to craft their own designs. These kits came with glass tubes, a small torch, and instructions for heating and shaping the glass into objects like ornaments or figurines. The process felt like a magical transformation, as clear glass turned into colorful shapes right before your eyes. However, the dangers were as clear as the glass itself. The high temperatures needed to melt the material often resulted in burns, even for the most cautious users. Shattered glass was another common hazard, as the delicate creations easily broke under pressure. To make matters worse, the torch posed a fire risk if left unattended or used recklessly. Do you remember the pride of completing a glass project, or the frustration of watching it break moments later? It's hard to believe this toy was marketed to children. For those who preferred games to crafts, the suspense of the Booby Trap game offered its own kind of thrill. The Booby Trap game was a hit in the 60s, offering simple yet nerve-wracking fun for kids and families. Players had to carefully remove wooden pieces from a spring-loaded board without triggering the mechanism. The tension built with every turn as everyone held their breath, waiting to see if the spring would snap. When it did, the results were often painful. The snapping board could pinch fingers or send the removed pieces flying, causing minor injuries or startling everyone in the room. Despite the risks, the game's suspenseful nature kept kids hooked, challenging them to test their dexterity and patience. Do you remember the rush of trying to pull out a piece without setting off the trap, or the laughter and yelps that followed when it snapped? Shrinky dinks were a creative marvel of the 1960s, allowing kids to draw designs on special plastic sheets, cut them out, and bake them in the oven. Watching the pieces shrink and harden into smaller, vibrant shapes felt like magic, sparking endless artistic possibilities. Kids made keychains, decorations, and even wearable accessories from their creations. However, the fun came with some risks. The baking process released chemical fumes that filled kitchens with a distinct, plasticky smell. Children, eager to grab their creations right out of the oven, often burned themselves on the still hot shapes. Parents were rarely concerned, leaving kids to handle the potentially dangerous process on their own. Do you remember the thrill of seeing your designs transform in the oven, or the disappointment of a warped or over-baked creation? Shrinky dinks were a unique mix of art and risk that defined childhood creativity. For those who loved sneaky surprises, the belt buckle gun offered a different kind of thrill. The belt buckle gun was the ultimate stealth toy for kids in the 1960s. Disguised as a regular belt buckle, it had a hidden cap gun that fired a small plastic projectile with the press of a button. Children loved the surprise factor, pretending to be spies or cowboys as they sneak attacked their friends or siblings. But the toy's design made it inherently dangerous. The projectiles, though small, could cause serious pain or even injury if fired at close range. Accidental shots to the face or eyes were not uncommon, leading to plenty of tears and scoldings from concerned parents. Do you remember the satisfaction of pulling off a perfect surprise shot, or the yelps of an unsuspecting target? The belt buckle gun may have been fun, but it was a risky choice for imaginative play. For budding scientists, though, the Atomic Water Lab offered its own brand of danger. The Atomic Water Lab brought the excitement of science into the hands of curious kids, promising to teach water purification techniques. This educational kit included chemicals like potassium permanganate and instructions for fascinating experiments. Young scientists could test their skills by creating reactions and learning about chemical processes. However, the risks were significant. Potassium permanganate and other included substances were toxic if ingested, and improper handling could result in burns or accidental spills. Without adult supervision, curious children often experimented beyond the instructions, sometimes leading to dangerous outcomes. Do you remember the sense of wonder as you mixed chemicals and waited for the reactions? It was both thrilling and nerve-wracking to watch science unfold before your eyes. But for those who preferred action over experiments, toy crossbows offered a different kind of hands-on fun. Toy crossbows in the 1960s were a hit with kids who dreamed of being Robin Hood or medieval knights. These miniature replicas often featured wooden or plastic frames and fired small bolts or darts with impressive speed and accuracy. Kids loved setting up targets in the backyard or staging battles with friends, testing their aim and daring. Unfortunately, the realistic design came with real dangers. The bolts, often tipped with plastic or metal, could cause painful injuries if misfired. Stray shots were common, and pets, siblings, or windows often bore the brunt of a poorly aimed arrow. The sharp edges of the bolts added to the risk, making this toy a hazard for unprepared players. Do you remember the pride of hitting a bullseye, or the panic of breaking a neighbor's window? Toy crossbows combined adventure and danger, creating memories that often came with a few scrapes. The toys of the 1960s brought fearless fun and unforgettable memories. Which ones do you remember? Share your favorites in the comments and subscribe for more nostalgic adventures.